Hello. So I'm very excited to start with you day 25, and I'm glad that days are passing and I have reached day 25. But I hopefully that I will make it to 6 hours today, or maybe I will make it less because today I'm quite tired. Also, during these last 10 days or during these 10 days, these coming 10 days, my health will be quite, I will be quite moody and I'll be quite tired all the time because every month this happened to me. So it just happens to every girl, but I hopefully that I'll manage to be able to study well and I will try all my best to continue 6 hours for this day. But if I could not come, I might make it up to 3 hours. So I hope that you make good studying habits as well and study very well in this day and hope you all best of luck. Now I'll start with my first hour. And good luck. So I'll just bring a pencil and come back. I don't know what I have my pencil left. So just to make.
20 years, I taught English. This is what I learned.
Hello and welcome everyone. This is Nino at AngloLink, and this is the 5th video in our series Learn the Tenses. Today we're going to talk about state verbs. This is a special group of verbs that you need to know about. And by the end of this video, you will know what they are and how to use them correctly. So, when you're ready, we can begin. Right, before we look at state verbs and differentiate them from action verbs, I'd like to give you a quick overview of the tenses that we've already looked at together. Let's review them with 3 action verbs. Say, play, drive, and rain. So remember, present simple was to speak about facts and habits. I play tennis once a week. He drives fast. It often rains here. And then we look at present continuous, which indicates an action which is in progress now. I'm playing tennis now. He's driving to Paris at the moment. It's raining again. And then we moved on to present perfect continuous, which was to talk about an action that started in the past and is still in progress. I've been playing tennis since I was 12. He has been driving for 3 hours. It has been raining all day. Then we looked at present perfect, an action that's complete at the time of speaking. I've played tennis with her once. He has driven 300 kilometers so far. It has rained 3 times this week. And then we looked at past simple, which was for an action completed at a specific time in the past. I played tennis with her when we were in Spain. He drove 100 kilometers before sunrise. It rained heavily last night. Now you notice that all these examples are with what we call action verbs. So what is the difference between an action verb and a state verb? An action verb, and most verbs are action verbs, designates an action, something that you can start and stop as and when you want. By contrast, state verb and there are only a few of them, designates a mental state that you cannot really start and stop whenever you want. There is a sense of continuity in them. such as designates a mental state that you cannot really start and stop whenever you want. There is a sense of continuity. In them, such as be, have, exist, know, etc. Because of this sense of continuity, they don't take continuous tenses. That's what you have to be careful with. When you're using your tenses, you've got to be careful not to put a state verb in the continuous form. For example, let's look at the verb to be.
Okay, so Brandon. Okay, so brand new thing for us. We're going to talk about factoring. And when we start with factoring, we start with like the most basic idea of factoring. Factoring polynomials by something called the GCF. Have you ever heard of the GCF before? That stands for the that's right, greatest common factor. Well, like I said, for some of you, this is review. We're going to go over what it means to be the greatest common factor, what factors even are, how to distinguish a common factor, and then how to use them. So the number one thing that we got to know is, when we talk about the GCF, is what the little factors mean in the first place. So when we talk about factors, or factors. Factors are these numbers, so that, and variables, that when we multiply them together, we get a term. So when we talk about factors, it's two or more numbers that multiply together to create a term. So what that means is that most of our terms you can separate into component factors that can be multiplied together. So two or more numbers or variables that are multiplied together to create a term. One key thing you need to know is multiplied though. Now, we don't add two numbers as factors to create a term. We can't get terms that way, but the addition, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the multiplication idea. And the reason why we're talking about that is because when we factor, we're really talking about dividing. You remember this word called distribution, yes? Remember distribution is the idea of multiplying and you get rid of parentheses? Factoring is the opposite idea. It's dividing to create parentheses. We'll talk about that later. So two or more numbers or variables that are multiplied to create a term. That's a really long-winded way to explain something that with an example I think is going to be really clear. Let's do just a couple very quick examples here. For instance, 15. Number 15 is a composite number. It's not a prime, which means it has some factors in there. Can you give me a factor of 15? 3. Okay, now, factors always come with pairs. So if you give me 3, you also give me 5. That's right. So 3 and 5 are two factors that multiply together to create 15. You guys are all read with the idea of factors. I'm not going to spend a lot more time on this, but 3 and 5 are just two examples of factors of 15. Now, what some people get a little confused on is, how in the world do we do this with, can we do it with variables? Well, the idea is, anytime you can take two quantities, whether they be numbers or variables, and multiply them together, well, those things are factors. So let me give you, for instance here, and you'll give me another one. X to the 7, you'll all know how to pronounce it, yeah? Say that for me. Perfect. If I can find two quantities, so two variables raised to another power, that when I multiply them together, they make x to the 7th, then I've found two factors. For instance, are you aware that x to the 3rd times x to the 4th, x to the 3rd times x to the 4th gives you x to the 7th? Are you aware of that one? Then those are two factors of x to the 7th. I want you to give me another one. So give me two sets of two variables, x to whatever power you can think of, that would also make up x to the 7th. So I've given you two, but there's several examples we could do. Give me another one. X squared, okay, x squared and x, sure. As long as x squared and x to the fifth multiply together to give me x to the seventh, then those are two different factors of x to the seventh. So basically, you feel okay with this so far? Most of people are okay with that so far? How about, let's do one more. How about if I give x? What would the other factor have to be? Perfect, because this counts as x to the first power. So then x and x to the sixth. Well, you know what's interesting is when we look at this, we have x, that's a factor, x to the sixth, x to the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth. All those powers of x are inherently factors of x to the seventh. Because it can always break it down. It's always being multiplied. Since x to the seventh is just x times 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 x. I think I have one too many x's there. We can always break off those x to the second times x to the fifth. Those are inherently factors. Am I getting through to you guys on this one? Okay, it's going to be important for our next thing. Now, common factors. So we've got factors. Now we're going to talk about common factors, and after that, the greatest common factors and how to use them. So what does it mean to be a common factor? When I say the word common to you, what's that mean in just in English? What's something common? So what? Something they have similar. Sure, something they have shared. Well, that's what it means here. Common kind of means shared. So when we talk about common factors, we're talking about shared factors. And I'll give you an example. So if you want just a basic definition of a common factor, think of it like a shared factor. You can write that down. Common factors mean a shared factor. Let me give you an example. What we're going to do right here is we're going to list out all the factors that we can think of in 12 or 28. So all the 12 and 28. So all those previous classes you had, like Math 80, Math 91, all that stuff, where you learned about factors, well, we're going to use that right now. But when we get to actual practice, it'll be much quicker for us. So right now we're going to list them. Give me some factors of 12, would you? 2 and 6. Do you know they always come in pairs? Do you know they always come in pairs? Unless you have a perfect square of 25, all your factors come in pairs. So typically what I tell students, if you had me before, you know this, start with 1. Is 1 a factor of 12? 1 goes in any number, right? So 1 is always a factor. 1 times what would give you 12? Well, no, there we go. So we got 2 factors already. Does 2 work? Is 2 a factor of 12? Yeah, sure. So we got 2 and anything else? 3. As soon as you cross over and get a factor you already have listed, you know you're done for sure. You don't have to keep checking. So we have 1, 12. Cool. We got 2, 6. Cool. We got 3, 4. How about 4? Oh, we already have it. As soon as you already have it, you're done with your factors. So as soon as you cross over and get one you already have, you're done. Now let's do 28. What should we start with? 28. 1. Yeah, sure. How about 2? Is 2 a factor? Yeah. 2 and what? 4. How about 3? Is 3 a factor? No. Is 3 going to 28 evenly? Then it can't be a factor. How about 4? Does 4 work? Okay. How about 5? How about 6? How about 7? Is it already on the board? Then we have listed all of our factors. If you do it in pairs, it's pretty quick like that. Not sure if you're with that so far. Now we're going to talk about the common factors. All you got to do, if you've listed them all out, is look for the factors that are the same. Give me one common factor. How about 1? Yeah. Does it do anything for it? Not really. It's always going to be 1. 2. What else? 4. Anything else? No. Okay, so we know 1's common, 2's common, 4's not 3, not 6, not 12. They're not listed both numbers. But the idea of these factors being shared is the idea of a common factor. Now, what we're going to get to eventually is the greatest common factor. We can probably talk about it right now. What one of those factors is the biggest number? That's the greatest common factor. That's the idea that you're going to be dealing with a lot of this chapter. Start with the greatest common factor first. Now, what's also interesting is we can list out the factors for variables, and I alluded to it over here. Let's talk about how you would list out for 12x squared. And after that, we're going to do x to the 4th at the top. Specifically about how to deal with these variables. Well, how about this one? How about with the 12? Do you realize that all of these factors, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 12, they're all still going to be factors of 12x? Are you with me? Do you understand why? Why we can list out 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 12, and even though this has an x squared, these are still factors. Do you guys get that? If you're not, you're like, well, I get it, but you really don't get it. Here's why. Do you get that 12x squared is the same thing as 12 times x squared? If factors are these pieces that you get to multiply together to create a term, then any factor of 12, when you multiply it by something else, will inherently create that same term. So anything that's a factor of 12, these are still factors. Do you guys get that? If you're not, you're like, well, I get it, but you really don't get it. Here's why. Do you get that 12x squared is the same thing as 12 times x squared? If factors are these pieces that you get to multiply together to create a term, then any factor of 12, when you multiply it by something else, will inherently create that same term. So anything that's a factor of 12, multiplying it, it's going to be a factor of 12x just by its very nature. Does that clear things up if you didn't correct it? So when we start with the factors of a term that has variables, you always start with just the factors of the numbers itself. So something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 12, cool, that's just the numbers. Now we talk about the variables. So we can tack those on here. Okay. Think back over here. When we had x to the 7, we had a lot of factors of x to the 7. In fact, the factors were x squared, x to the 3rd, x to the 4th, x to the 5th, x to the 6th, 1 is already up there, and x to the 7th. So basically every power, listen carefully, okay? Every power leading up to this largest power is always a factor. So when you list this out, all you gotta do is go, okay, well, is x to the 1st a factor? Yes. Is x to the 2nd a factor? Is it here with them? Yeah, x to the 2nd is a factor. Is x to the third a factor here? No, that'd be too much. But what you're going to do, if I listed this out, okay, I'm going to take a little shortcut. If I listed out all the factors, I would have 1. 1 goes into anything. It's always a factor. Remember, factors come in pairs, usually. So if I have 1, I would also have x to the 7th. Hey, just listen. Is it true that 1 times x to the 7th gives me x to the 7th? Those are factors. Multiply together, they have to be factors. If I do x to the first power, it's got to come in pairs. What else? X to the 6. That's right. Hey, oh, look at that. How about x to the second? Can I multiply x to the second by something to get x to the 7th? What is it? 5. X to the third? Yeah. X to the fourth. Notice, look at this. What this says is if you do that by pairs, which you said that we already can do, right? Are you with me? If you do that, then what you have listed out here is 1, and then every single power of x up until you get to that power. So here, we already have the 1. It's built in. 1's there all the time. We have the 2, the 3, the 4, the 6, the 12, all by virtue of having that 12 in that term. Now we also have x. Is that a power underneath x squared? X to the second? Yeah. So just list out every single power until we get to that one. Let's try it here, okay? You tell me what I'm going to have for my 15. What's the first number that I'm going to put up there? Probably 1, because I need the 15. So we deal with the numbers first. What else? 3 comes with 5. Is there anything else? No. So 1 and 15, 2 doesn't work, 3 works with 5, 4 doesn't work, 5, we already got the 5, we're done. We're done with the numbers. Now let's try the variables. So I want us to list out what the variables are as far as our factors go. What's the first one? Should I put x squared up there? Sure. Is it a power under x to the 4th? Then it's, do you guys get that it's inherently a factor if it's less than that power? Because I can always write it as a power lower than this times another power. X to the third is lower than x to the 7th, multiplied by x to the 4th. X to the second is lower than x to the 7th, multiplied by x to the 5th. X to the first is lower than x to the 7th, multiplied by x to the 6th. So we always make it up. That means that every single power below or equal to that one is going to be a factor. just list them. Makes it easy. So x to the first, yes. X to the second, yes. How about x to the third? Yeah. Of course. How about x to the fourth? Yes. Yeah. How about x to the fifth? No. X to the fourth? Yes. Show of hands if you're okay with the factors as far as variables go. This part, yeah, probably pretty easy. I know you know that. The variables are what I'm talking about right now. That's what people get a little confused with the question.
The one that threw me off was the 12x squared at the very end, where you have an x by itself and then the x squared. So when I see that, I'm seeing 3 with the 2 x's on the
Okay, keep in mind that what's going on here is that we're listing out these terms. We're not multiplying all these things together. If you multiply all these things, you're getting way more than 12. Okay, and you're going to get way more than x squared. We're just listing them. If you multiply this all out, wow, that's x2 that add all those things up. What we're doing is saying, well, what could we divide by? We can divide by 1. We can divide by x and x squared and x. If you can divide by these things, they are factors, because that means that when you multiply two things together, they give you that term. So we're not multiplying these things, we're listing them right now. That clear that up for you? Okay, now let's talk about the common factors, and this is where it's going to get important. What are some common factors here? What do you see? Go on. What? 3. Great. 3. Anything else? Oh. So as far as the numbers go, anything else besides 1 and 3? What's the, listen carefully, okay, this is where we're going to jump to the greatest common factor. What's the biggest number? Good. Now we look at the variables almost independently. So do we have common factors? Yeah. This is weird though, right? Every power is going to be listed up to the largest one. So x is a common factor. What else is a common factor? Now, how about x to the third? Is that a common factor? Is it in both places? How about x to the fourth? No, okay. What's bigger, x or x squared? Same question as what's bigger, 1 or 3. So when we get to talk about the greatest common factor, here's what you do, and listen carefully. You find the greatest common factor of the numbers. That would be 3. You with me? You find the greatest common factor of the variables. What's bigger? You put those two together. So the 3 and the, why not the x? The biggest. Why not the x to the fourth? It's not there. You take the biggest one that's shared by both. That, by definition, is the greatest common shared factor. So what we do numbers, we do the variables, we put them together. This right here is the idea of the GCF. What I want to know is that, does that make sense to you? Show hands if it does. Feel okay with that? This is Destiny, yes? Okay, cool. Kind of cheated and went a little bit ahead. So when we're talking about this, we know what factor is. Factors are those pieces. that are multiplied together give us terms. All about multiplication. Common factors when they're shared. And now we jump to the greatest common factor. The greatest common factor is the biggest shared factor. So when we say GCF, what it means here is the biggest shared factor. And right now what I'd like to do, I'd like to just go over some examples and get us really, really, really good at finding this. If we fail at finding GCF, we're gonna fail at factoring. This is huge for us. Is the very first step every time is factoring the GCF. Whenever we talk about that, getting through to you. So let's practice. We're not going to even worry about variables right now. We're just going to do some numbers. Just finding GCF. Are there any questions on factors, common factors, or the idea of the GCF? I know this is not purely explained yet, but I want to know if you understand the idea that the greatest common factor is just this biggest thing that's shared by both these terms. Do you understand that? The biggest factor. Okay, good. It's shared by both terms. All right. Well, if we're going to talk about the greatest common factor, this biggest shared factor, we got to have at least two numbers. So let's start with 45 and 75. Yeah, it looks like 75 to me, doesn't it? Oh, geez, come on, Leonard. 75. I'm going to give you two ways to do this. The first way is the way that you already know. I'm going to go very fast through that method one. List them all out. That's your first method. You should know how to do that from a previous class. The second method, some teachers gloss over, so I'll make sure you see it once. The first method is, just list them all out. So if you have trouble with finding the GCF just in your head, by the way, we need the grade, so I don't want you to just give me one all the time. What's the greatest common factor? One? No. That's a factor. Is it the biggest one? Generally not, unless you have two relatively prime numbers. But no. So if we're going to list these out, we got 1 and we got 45. We'd have 3 and we'd have 15. We'd have 5 and we'd have 9. Did I miss any? Am I good? Can you think of any more? I can't think of any more. So 1, 3, 5, 9, 15, 45. I think I have them all. Let's do 75. Again, my job right now is not to teach you how to do this. This should be there already. My job is to teach you what to do with it afterwards. So the next one. We got 1, we got 75. What else?
325.
Yep, 325. Perfect. What else? 115. Okay, anything else? Can you think of any more than that? That's all I have written down. Okay. Well, do we have any common factors?
Yes.
What's the first one? 1. Is it the biggest one? Are you always going to have 1? Yeah, of course you will. 3. Is that the biggest one? 5. Tell you what, if 3 and 5 are both here, that means you have something bigger. Because they're both multiplied give you 15. You're going to have a 15. 15, is that the biggest one? Yeah. So right now we know our GCF is 15. For small numbers, that's probably the way to go. I will give you another way to do this. Not hard, just a little bit more kind of advanced thinking. I use some number theory here. So if I had 45, another way we could do this, you could do this with a number tree. Number trees with factor trees, with greatest common factors and prime factorization says you start with the smallest prime numbers and you break it down until you have only prime numbers here. For instance, 3 squared times 5 would be the prime factorization. If you did 75, it'd start out really similar. You'd have 3 times 25, and that would give you 5 times 5. So we would have 3 times 5 squared. I want to know if that makes sense to you. Have you seen that before? You might not remember exactly how to do it, but you've seen it before. You start with the smallest primes, not the biggest ones. So you start with 2. And if those no 2s, you go to 3. Then you go to 5. Then you 7, 9, 11, sorry, not 9, 11, then 13, and so forth and so on. Well, if we did this, we got 3 squared times 5. We got 3 times 5 squared. The GCF will always always be the smallest powers of every. I hope some of you guys are zoning. I hope you're not zoning out. Some of you guys are not listening right now. This is a really good thing to do with large numbers. Tell you right off the bat, it's probably the best way to go. Take the smallest power of every different factor. The factors that I see here are 3 and 5, and then 3 and 5 again. Do you see that? You can always find the GCF by doing this. What's smaller, folks? Smaller, 3 squared or 3? 3. So GCF. Yeah, I'm sorry, which one? 3. That's smaller. Times, what's smaller? 5 or 5 squared? What's 3 times 5? 15. Always works. Why that's nice is because if I give you really big numbers, like, let's do the greatest common factor, 196, 2,187, or 84. You don't want to do that in your head? You're going to want to write out every single factor of 2, whatever I said? I know I just made it up. You don't want to do that? No, but prime factorization is pretty quick. That's another way that you can go. Okay, let's move on just a little bit. How about, I want to know if that makes sense to you. Have you seen that before? You might not remember exactly how to do it, but you've seen it before. You start with the smallest primes, not the biggest ones. So you start with 2. And if those no 2s, you go to 3. Then you go to 5. Then you 7, 9, 11, sorry, not 9, 11, then 13, and so forth and so on. Well, if we did this, we got 3 squared times 5. We got 3 times 5 squared. The GCF will always be the smallest powers of every. I hope some of you guys are zoning. I hope you're not zoning out. Some of you guys are not listening right now. This is a really good thing to do with large numbers. I'll tell you right off the bat, it's probably the best way to go. Take the smallest power of every different factor. The factors that I see here are 3 and 5, and then 3 and 5 again. Do you see that? You can always find the GCF by doing this. What's smaller, folks? Smaller, 3 squared or 3? 3. So GCF. Yeah, I'm sorry, which one? 3. That's smaller. Times, what's smaller, 5 or 5 squared? 5. What's 3 times 5? 15. Always. Why that's nice is because if I give you really big numbers, like let's do the greatest common factor, 196, 2,187, or 84. You don't want to do that in your head? You're going to want to write out every single factor of whatever I said. I know I just made it up. You don't want to do that? No, but prime factorization is pretty quick. That's another way that you can go. Okay, let's move on just a little bit. How about 32 and 33? 32 and 33. 32 and 33. What are the factors of thirty-two? 1 and 32, I'll give you that. I'll do the hard one for you. Okay, 1 and 32, I got it. Got your back. 2 and 16. Give me another one, someone else. 4 and 8. 4 and 8. How about 5? 6? 7? 8? Already got it, so we're done. 33 is going to be a little bit quicker here. We got 1 and we got 33. Anything else? 4 doesn't work, 5 doesn't work, 6 doesn't work, 7 doesn't work, 8 doesn't work, 9 doesn't work, 10 doesn't work, 11 does, but it's already up there, so we're done. Here's my question. Are there any common factors? Any common factors? One. There's always at least one common factor, and it's 1. So are there cases where you can have two numbers which only have a greatest common factor of 1? Yeah. It's called, if you want fancy words, called relatively prime. It means that they have no common factors besides 1. Nothing will be common that you can factor out of those two numbers. This right here, this is what we're looking to have after we factor, is numbers that are relatively prime, that no other number goes into it besides 1. So here, when you have a GCF of 1, it means that if I have two terms with those numbers, I'm not going to be able to factor it the way that I want to. How about if I have, let's see. How about 14, 24, and 60? Are we able to find the greatest common factor of 3 numbers? Is that possible? It means the same thing. It just means, hey, let's find the biggest number that will go into all 3 of these. So you can do it the same way that you did before. You can do it this way. You can list out all the factors if you want to, and find them. So if you want to do it kind of quickly, and not write everything down, I'll give you a little helpful hint here. Start with the one that has the least number of factors. For instance, if I was going to do this in my head and I didn't want to write all of them down because I don't like doing that, okay? I'd start probably with 14. And here's what I'd do. I'd say 14 on 2 of 3 numbers. Is that possible? It means the same thing. It just means, hey, let's find the biggest number that will go into all 3 of these. So you can do it the same way that you did before. You can do it this way. You can list out all the factors if you want to, and find them. So if you want to do it kind of quickly, and not write everything down, I'll give you a little helpful hint here. Start with the one that has the least number of factors. For instance, if I was going to do this in my head and I didn't want to write all of them down because I don't like doing that, okay? I'd start probably with 14. And here's what I'd do. I'd say 14. I'd write them out so I don't miss any. You don't want to miss them. I'd have 1, I'd have 14, I'd have 2, and I'd have 7. Would we agree those are all the factors?
Yes.
Okay. To be a greatest common factor of 3 numbers, do you get that they have to go into all 3 of them?
Yes.
So if I'm, let's see, like here, 6 goes into both 24 and 60, doesn't it? But does it go into 14? No. It can't be the GCF. It's got to go into all 3. So if you pick the number with the least number of factors, sometimes you can cheat a little bit. 1, do I care about 1? No. Okay. 2. Does 2 go to 14?
Yes.
Obviously. Does 2 go to 24?
Yes.
Does 2 go to 60?
Yes.
Potentially that's it. Check the other ones just to be sure that there's nothing bigger. Does 7 go into 24? No. 7 goes into 21. It can't go into 24. Does 7 go into 24? No. Do we care if it goes into 60 once we've determined it's going to 24? No. So this doesn't matter. Does 14 go into 24? No. You have quickly found the GCF just by the process of elimination. Pick the one, pick the number that has the least number of factors. Just check the factors. If they don't go into both numbers, I write them out so I don't miss. Are we able to find the greatest common factor of 3 numbers? Is that possible? It means the same thing. It just means, hey, let's find the biggest number that will go into all 3 of these. So you can do it the same way that you did before. You can do it this way. You can list out all the factors if you want to, and find them. So if you want to do it kind of quickly, and not write everything down, I'll give you a little helpful hint here. Start with the one that has the least number of factors. For instance, if I was I was going to do this in my head, and I didn't want to write all of them down because I don't like doing that, okay? I'd start probably with 14. And here's what I'd do. I'd say 14. I'd write them out so I don't miss any. You don't want to miss them. I'd have 1, I'd have 14, I'd have 2, and I'd have 7. Would we agree those are all the factors?
Yes.
Okay. To be a greatest common factor of 3 numbers, do you get that they have to go into all 3 of them?
Yes.
So if I'm, let's see, like here, 6 goes into both 24 and 60, doesn't it? But does it go into 14?
No.
It can't be the GCF. It's got to go into all 3. So if you pick the number with the least number of factors, sometimes you can cheat a little bit. 1, do I care about 1? No. Okay. 2, does 2 go to 14?
Yes.
Obviously. Does 2 go to 24?
Yes.
Does 2 go to 60?
Yes.
Potentially that's it. Check the other one, just to be sure that there's nothing bigger. Does 7 go into 24? No. 7 goes into 21. It can't go into 24. Does 7 go into 24? No. Do we care if it goes into 60 once we've determined it's going to 24? So this doesn't matter. Does 14 go into 24? You have quickly found the GCF just by the process. Process of elimination. Pick the one, pick the number that has the least number of factors. Just check the factors. If they don't go into both numbers, then they're not the GCF. Show of hands if that made sense to you. Could you have done it this way? Does 7 go into 24? Do we care if it goes?
Yes.
So if I'm, let's see, like here, 6 goes into both 24 and 60, doesn't it? But does it go into 14?
No.
It can't be the GCF. It's got to go to all 3. So if you pick the number with the least number of factors, sometimes you can cheat a little bit. 1, do I care about 1? No. Okay. 2, does 2 go to 14?
Yes.
Obviously. Does 2 go to 24?
Yes.
Does 2 go to 60?
Yes.
Potentially that's it. Check the other ones just to be sure that there's nothing bigger. Does 7 go into 24? No. 7 goes into 21, it can't go into 24. Does 7 go into 24? Do we care if it goes into 60 once we determine it doesn't go into 24? So this doesn't matter. Does 14 go into 24? You have quickly found the GCF just by the process of elimination. Pick the one, pick the number that has the least number of factors. Just check the factors. If they don't go into both numbers, then they're not the GCF. Show of hands if that made sense to you. Could you have done it this way and listed them all? Absolutely, but I'm trying to save you guys some time. I'm saving your lives, right? Lives are time. I'm saving your lives. So the GCF for these ones, just do very quick way to do it. Okay, I kind of previewed this a little bit, an example that was right here before. We're going to talk about variables, and then we're going to put all this stuff together and learn how to factor. Are you ready? This is the good stuff. So here we go. Next example, let's talk about the variables. If I wanted to find the GCF of x squared, x to the fourth, and x to the fifth. GCF of x squared, x to the fourth, and x to the fifth. For those of you who get this idea already, this is a really easy question. Really easy. If you don't, I'm going to make it easy right now. Let's let's do this with what we have here. So if I were to list out the factors, you remember listing out factors? You remember listing out factors? How when I do this? Well, there's always a 1. But then I'm just going to have all the powers leading up to my largest power. That's what I have. Let's look at this real carefully. Do you understand that 1's always a factor? Always divides everything. Is x a factor? It's a power of x less than 2. Is x squared a factor? Of course it is, because 1 times that gives me this term. If I want to do x to the fourth, well, I'm just going to have 1, but I'm going to have x and x squared and x to the third and x to the fourth. Every power leading up to x to the fourth. If I do x to the fifth, I'm going to have 1 and x squared and x to the third and x to the fourth and x to the fifth. Hope so. Did I do it right? Okay, now here's my question. Do we have any shared factors? Is it x to the fifth? I'll tell you what, a lot of students when they're first learning this, they look at that and go, oh yeah, x to the fifth, it's the biggest number. It's the biggest one. Obviously that's going to be it. It's greatest. No, greatest shared. So all of these have at least x squared, correct? Well, that's really what we're looking for. We're looking for all of them have at least this much. If you look here, the biggest one that's actually shared is right there. I don't care that that's x to the third and it's shared there. I don't care. That doesn't have it, so it's not the greatest common. Common means shared, the greatest common factor. That's what we're looking for. Show of hands if you feel okay with that idea. Cool. So in our case, it becomes really easy. You look at these ones, well, I know it seems funny, but take the smallest power. If you take the smallest power that's listed right here, that's the share. That's the one that's shared. You can't do x to the fifth because that doesn't have x to the fifth. It has at most x squared. Does this have, this has x squared, yeah? Does this have at least x squared? Does this have at least x squared in it? Then that's your GCF. So GCF here would be x squared. I want you to try one. Just real quick to make sure that you all get the hang of it. Let's do a couple examples. What I want from you is I want the GCF of y to the fourth, y to the fifth, and y to the eighth. And then I want the GCF of x and x to the 10th. And you can just write it right next to the 10th. If you need to list out all the factors like I did here, do it until it really makes sense. Don't do shortcuts right now because this is imperative to understand this. So if you need to list them out, list every power of x up until that number. List every power of x up until that number. List every power of x up until that number. With the biggest one, that's your GCF. You can do that every time. Once you understand this concept, though, you can go very, very fast on that. Does anyone need more? Time on these? Have you figured out the GCF for y to the 4th, y to the 5th, and y to the 8th? What's the biggest power that's shared by all three of those terms? What is it? Y to the 4th. Perfect. That's right. You can't go any bigger because that doesn't have any more than y to the 4th. It's kind of like going out to lunch with your buddies and you want to make sure that everybody eats, and you have $8 and you have $5 and poor Leonard has $4, and you go, let's go to this place where it costs $5. Can I eat? And $4. Can I eat? No. Let's go to this place that has $8. Can I eat? That's for you guys. Where's everyone gonna be able to eat? At the $4 restaurant. That's my type of living, folks. You gotta go where everyone can eat. So go where the power is shared by all. Y to the 4th. Hopefully that analogy makes sense. How about x and x to the, oh wow, how many x's are here? What power of x is that? 1. X to the 10th. What's the greatest common factor? X. You can't go any bigger than that because this guy only has $1. Poor guy. That's it. That has more, sure, but you need to go with the largest factor that is shared by all the terms that are listed. I've explained it well enough for you guys to understand it. Now we're going to put the idea together. We're going to talk about the greatest common factor of these terms that involve both numbers and variables, but it's no different than what you've done. Did you guys get the numbers? Get the variables. Do the same thing. You put them together at the end. So let's talk about that real quick. Did you know about that, by the way? If you didn't, isn't that kind of neat? Works every time. It's really awesome. I like it. So we're going to find the GCF here. I'm going to stop just writing out all the factors. We're going to get to the point where this is going to be very easy for us to do in our heads because we're so good at doing factors and numbers and listing factors in our heads and variables now. So we're going to stop listing out everything. It's going to take way too long. And the idea is get the greatest common factor quickly and then use that to factor. We're going to be doing that in a minute. So what I want you to do here, when you're factoring out the greatest common factor, when you're looking for the greatest common factor, do the numbers first, then do the variables, and just combine them. So I remember that we had an example like that, right? We kind of cheated and went in advance. I'll do that from time to time. Let's look at the numbers. The numbers here are, what are the coefficients is what they're called. What's the coefficients? They utilize one of them. Someone else, what's another coefficient? 15, and then is there a number that goes into all three of those numbers? You can always answer yes, because it's 1. I want the biggest number that goes into all three. 3 does. Sure. So one's not going to help us. 6 doesn't work. So when we write out GCF, we can do it in a 2-part process. We do the numbers first. So 3, it's true, right? 3 goes in 9, 15, and 6, we're good. And then we do the variable. So when we look at the variables, it's basically doing this process first, exactly the same. Just like we got the 2, we got the 3. Do the same thing. I'm going to stop just writing out all the factors. We're going to get to the point where this is going to be very easy for us to do in our heads because we're so good at doing factors and numbers and listing factors in our heads and variables now. So we're going to stop listing out everything. It's going to take way too long. And the idea is get the greatest common factor quickly and then use that to factor. We're going to be doing that later. So what I want you to do here, when you're factoring out the greatest common factor, when you're looking for the greatest common factor, do the numbers first, then do the variables, and just combine them. So I remember that we had an example like that, right? Kind of cheating and went in advance. I'll do that from time to time. Let's look at the numbers. The numbers here are, what are the coefficients is what they're called. What's the coefficients? They utilize one of them. Someone else, what's another coefficient? 15, and then is there a number that goes into all three of those numbers? You can always answer yes, because it's 1. I want the biggest number that goes into all three. 3 does. Sure. So one's not going to help us. 6 doesn't work. So when we write out GCF, we can do it in a 2-part process. We do the numbers first. So 3, it's true, right? 3 goes in 9, 15, and 6, we're good. And then we do the variable. So when we look at the variables, it's basically doing this process first, exactly the same. Just like we got the 2, we got the 3. Do the same thing. Then do the variables. Just like we got the x squared here, or the x. What's the greatest common factor as it refers to the variables in this case? What is it? That's right. That's got more, that's got more, but well, that's the smallest one. So we have to go with the guys who got the smallest amount of money here. These guys only got $1. So yeah, these guys have at least 1x, but we're going with the greatest common thing. Has to be shared. So I can list out x to the 4th. That would take this guy out of the picture and that guy out of the picture. X squared would, this guy would have it, but that guy wouldn't. So x to the first power is, as far as the variable is concerned, greatest common factor. What that means is when we put our numbers and our variables together, greatest common factor is, does 3x go into this term? Sure it does. Remember, it goes in means divides because it factors multiplication, so the English that is division. Does 3x divide 15x to the 4th? Yeah, of course. Does it divide 6x? Yes. Yeah. Notice how if this was a square, would x squared divide x? If that was a 4, would that divide? I think I said 4 and wrote 2, didn't I? Oh well. No, you said 2. I did? You said 2 first, wrote 2, then write 4. I got it right? Yes. Yeah. Yes. Perfect. Tell you what, I'm going to do one more with you. Kind of a more advanced one. Looks more advanced, not harder, it's the same exact thing. Then I'm going to have you do a couple on your own. Okay? So you can practice it. So the first thing is, lots going on. It can look intimidating, but follow the explanation here. Follow the explanation. Explanation. find the GCF for your numbers, and then look for the GCF of your variables. Don't just do it all at once. It can be kind of hard to do. So first thing, let's just see. Let's look at 10 different variables. Let's look at numbers. What are the coefficients here? Coefficient. 11. 1. It's not. It's never nothing. 1. 1. Yeah. If there's nothing there, it's 1. So coefficient 11, 1. Hey, what number goes into all three? 11, 1, and 1. 1. Do you need to write down the 1? No. Really? I prefer if you did, but I'm going to put it here just to say that we did it, okay? Now we're going to go over to the A's and our B's. You know what? Just like we can do our numbers independently of our variables, you can do each variable independently of themselves because it's all being multiplied together. So don't worry about the B's right now. Look at the A's. I got A, 2 what up? 1. Do you know that you've done right now? Yeah. A to the second, and A to, okay, what's in common to all three of those? Not A to the second? Not A to the fourth, because that's 1, 2, 3, 4? No, don't do that, okay? You're looking at these independently saying, what's the biggest value of A, power of A, that's going to go into all three? And that would be A to the first. Are you with me on this one? Are you sure? Yeah. Guess I know this, no? Okay, yeah, we're all good. So 1 goes into all the coefficients. A to the first power, well, that's the greatest common factor as far as A to do. Let's do the B. I have B to the third, I have B to the third, and I have B squared. What's the biggest one that goes into all of them? Erase this 1. That is our GCF. Does it make, you know what, you should always check it too. You should always check it. Does AB squared divide this? In fact, if I divided it, I would have B to the first power left over. Are you with me on that one? Yeah. Does this divide this? Yeah. I would have A times B if I divided that. Does this divide this? Yeah. I would have what? 1. Are you ready to try some more here? Yes. Yay. Easy, medium, hard. What do you think? Medium? You're still learning it, right? Is it going to take practice? Yeah. I'm sure it's going to take some practice. Do the numbers, do the variables. You can do each variable independently. Just don't start picking the biggest power that you see. That's a problem. Pick the biggest power that's shared. By all of them and get it right every time. I hope you understand that doing this is so important for what we're going to do next, because you can't factor unless you know how to find the greatest common factor. I mean, it's right there. You've got to know how to do it. I think you'll be fine at it, but we'll need to practice it. Okay, so how about I want the GCF. Negative. 18y squared, negative 63y to the third, 27y to the fourth. One thing I want you to look at here, did you notice how that negative had nothing to do with what that was? It's interesting, right? Okay. And we'll talk more about how to use that to your advantage when we actually do the factoring. So I want the GCF here, I want the GCF here, and I'll give you one more just for funsies. Actually, some of you might be done, just have to write them down, huh? They can go pretty quickly. example. Have I given enough time to complete these, or at least do the first two? All right. First example. What should we do? Should we look at all of this, or just the numbers first? Numbers. Do numbers. 18. Do I need to worry about the negatives? When we're actually factoring, I'll show you how to do that appropriately. But right now, no. And it's not going to affect the actual absolute value of what you factor anyway. So 18, 63, 27. Man, have you found something that goes in all of this? 9 goes in all of it. You know, you could check it with maybe this one, or maybe this one, because it has at least 100 factors. This has 1, 3, 9, and 27. Does 27 work here? No. Maybe go to the 9. Does 9 work here?
Yeah.
Does 9 work here? Hey, you're done. It's 9. Now, variables at this point should be really easy. It's easy. It looks, I mean, you think it should be harder. It's not. The numbers are harder. What's the greatest common factor as far as variables are concerned that are shared by all three? What is it? Perfect. That's exactly right. You don't add them all up and get y to the 9th or something. You just get, well, the one that's shared by all y squared. Show hands, we got 9y squared. Brilliant. Very well done. Okay, how about the next one? Numbers first. We got 4, we got 3. What's the number as far as your GCF? 1. You can write down the 1, just keep it in our head that we do our numbers. Now, the variables have x squared, x to the 3rd, x to the 8th. What is the greatest common variable? X squared. So we're going to have 1x squared. Erase the 1, you don't need it. But let's double check. Does x squared go into this? Yeah. Yep. Does x squared go into this? Yeah. Go into this? Yeah. Good. Did you get to that one? Kind of fun, right? What's the greatest common factor as far as the number is concerned? 1. There are no coefficients besides 1, so you can have a 1. You don't even need to write it if you don't want to. Let's talk about the a's. Remember, you can do the a's and the b's or any variables independently of each other. So look at the a's first. What's the greatest common factor in regards to the powers of a? Beautiful. Why is it a squared and not a to the 4th? Because that is the most mathematical. So even though a to the 4th is the biggest power of a, it's not the biggest power of a that can be found in each term. A's second is. How about the b's? Sure. Does that have at least this in it? Yeah. You can divide, right? Have we gone over any of the powers? No. Okay, so we're good. That's our greatest common factor. So things are good now. Perfect. We're going to go just over a couple examples about how to use this. Really, I want to just get the steps in your head. That way, next time we come in, this is going to be we're going to be money on this. Do you feel okay about finding the factors of numbers, variables, putting them together? If you can do this, you can factor. And here's how we do it. By the way, what I'll do sometimes when I first introduce them, I'll give you an example and I'll give you the steps on how to do it so you can refer back to how to do this later. So let's start with something very simple. Some of you might have, I'm guessing you have seen this before. Let's do something like 6x plus 14. 6x plus 14. Now, instead of just listing out the factors, we're going to be factoring. We're going to be using that greatest common factor, finding the greatest common factor, to our advantage. Now, here's the deal. You already know what distribution is, correct? So if I gave you don't need to write this down, just watch, I'm erasing it. If I gave you 5 times x plus 2, and I said distribute, you would multiply this here, you would multiply this here, and you get 5x plus 10. Yes, no? Yes. What we're doing in factoring is literally going opposite of that. Reverse of that. So whereas distribution is multiplication to get rid of parentheses. Okay, focus up here for a second. Whereas distribution is multiplication to get rid of parentheses, factoring is the opposite. What's the opposite of multiplication? And that means we're going to be creating parentheses. So when you factor, you're basically going not from here to here, which you're used to. You're going from here to here. You're going in reverse. So we're not multiplying, we're dividing. We're not getting rid of parentheses. We're creating them. Quick head nod if you feel okay with the idea of that. Good. So step number one. All this stuff we've been doing is step number one. So find the GCF of all the terms. I am expecting that you understand what a term is. When we look at this, term, term, not term, term, term. Terms are those pieces of a mathematical expression that are separated by pluses and minuses. So when you look at this problem, this expression, this is one term, that's one term. You all aware of that one? Okay, so what we're going to do first, find the GCF of all the terms. Well, let's do that. Let's do the GCF of all the terms. Tell me, parentheses. So when you factor, you're basically going not from here to here, which you're used to. You're going from here to here. You're going in reverse. So we're not multiplying. We're dividing. We're not getting rid of parentheses, we're creating them. Quick head nod if you feel okay with the idea of that. Good. So step number one. All the stuff we've been doing is step number one. So find the GCF of all the terms. I am expecting that you understand what a term is. When we look at this, term, term, not term, term, term. Terms are those pieces of a mathematical expression that are separated by pluses and minuses. So when you look at this problem, this expression, this is one term, that's one term. You all read that one?
Me?
Okay, so what we're going to do first, find the GCF of all the terms. Well, let's do that. Let's do the GCF. Tell me, GCF, can you look at 6x and 14? Just pretend it's like this, okay? Pretend it's like that. Can you look at 6x and 14 and tell me a greatest common factor? What about variables? Are there any variables that are shared? So it's not like this or this where we have shared variables. This has an x, this don't have an x. It can't be in the GCF. Well, what do you say the GCF word again? 2. 2 is the biggest factor that goes into both of these. Show of hands if you're okay with that. The number came first, and we had no variables, so we're good. Step number 2. What you're going to do is step number 2. After you found the GCF, write the GCF in front of some parentheses. So step number 2 says, I'm sorry, one more time. What's our GCF? And factoring, it gets rid of parentheses or it creates parentheses? So we're going to do our GCF, and then we're going to put a set of parentheses. This is what I mean by step number 2. So step number 1, find GCF. Oh my gosh, we should be so good at that right now, right? We spent an entire hour finding GCF. Now, write the GCF in front of some parentheses because that's what we're creating here. After that, step number 3. Distribution multiplies. Factoring divide. Each term, we know what terms are. Divide each term by GCF. Just divide, that's it. You all know how to divide. Even if there was variables, you would know how to divide that. We'll say There's some subsequent examples, but here we go. So step one, find GCF. You all feel okay with GCF? Okay, step two, write the GCF. Hey, already done. Got it. Step three, just divide. Take each one of these terms and divide it by the number you just written. So can you do 6x divided by 2? What's 6x divided by 2? 3. It still has the x, correct? Because there was no x to divide, so it's okay. Plus, hey, plus. Can you do 14 divided by 2? That, ladies and gentlemen, is factoring. Step number 4, just check the work. Make sure you have it right. Do not go any further until you have it right. Here's how you check. Okay, listen. Here's how you check whether you have it right. The first thing you do, you distribute to make sure this is accurate. Is 2 times 3x 6x?
Yes.
Is 2 times 7 14?
Yes.
The next thing you do, you make absolutely certain that you have found the GCF. What that means is that remember the special word I gave you phrase? It's called relatively prime. Remember that? These numbers have to be relatively prime. If they're not, you made a mistake. Can you divide 3 and 7 by anything besides 1?
No.
That's good. Are there any shared variables here?
No.
That means you factored the GCF correctly. That's the whole idea. So step number 4, if you want to write step 4, is just check your work, and that's the 2 ways that you do it. Show of hands if today has made sense for you. Good. Okay, so we're going to continue factoring. And the very first step, I'm going to say this probably a hundred times. The very first step in factoring anything that you're going to factor is always finding the GCF, if there is one. That is your first step, no matter what else I teach you for the rest of the semester. Whenever you're involved in factoring, very first thing you check for is what? GCF. That's number 1. So in our case up here, the idea is, I'll let you do this because it's been a while since we've done any of this. The very first idea is, look at how many terms you have. Remember, terms are those things, those pieces of a math expression that are separated by pluses and or minuses. So pluses or minuses, how many terms? Do I have? Look at those 2 terms, and basically we just find the GCF like we practiced so many times before with those 2 terms. Remember that we're looking for numbers first, and then variables, and we put those 2 things together. So when we look at 49x minus 35, those 2 terms, 49x and the 35, we think of a number, any number that can go into both of those terms, and the biggest number, the greatest number that goes into factors both of those terms, common, greatest common factor. What number goes into both of those? Okay, so I'm not going to rewrite the steps I gave it to you last time, but the idea is once you have determined what the GCF is, you can write it down. You don't really have to, but you can. Just keep it in your mind. We get the number first. Then we look for any variables. Are there any variables common to both of these terms? So while this has an x, that one doesn't, we say no, there's no variable that's common to both. Hence, our GCF for this expression is just 7. Show me feel okay with that so far. Cool deal. Now, the next step I gave you was, well, factoring is the opposite, the inverse of distribution. So where distribution multiplies and gets rid of parentheses, factoring divides and creates them. So we're really creating parentheses every time we factor. That always, if you factor something, you're going to create parentheses. So when we've determined our GCF is 7, what I've said to do is put that 7, the GCF, right out front, and then create a set of parentheses. What you're saying here is I'm going the opposite of distribution. I'm going to create parentheses and divide to get my inner two terms here. So basically, since distribution is multiply, factoring is divide, to get these two terms, we're just going to divide. What are we going to divide by? Why? That's it. That's a GCF. That's what actually divides into both of those terms. So we're going to take that. Sometimes you can do it in your head. When they get more advanced, I'll show you some methods on how to write this out so that you can see really what's going on. Basically, you do it term by term. Can you do 49x divided by 7? What is it? That goes right here. That's our very first term. So it's just these two terms divided by our GCF, and we put our remaining two terms inside our parentheses. Can you check your work? Yes. Yeah, if factoring is the opposite of distribution, that means to check our work, we just have to distribute. So 7 times 7x is 49x. We know we got it right. Also, this sign is going to be the same unless we start factoring out negatives, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But generally, if you're factoring out positive numbers, your signs don't change. Now we go to the next one. What's 35? Remember, we're dividing, we're factoring. What's 35 divided by 7? 5. And you always double check your work. Don't go any further. It'd be so silly to go further because right now, this is the problem, right? It's can you factor or not? Later on in chapter 7, 8, 9, no, it's not 9, but 10, 11, 12, 13, you're going to be factoring, but that's a small part of the puzzle. So don't just assume you have it right and go on and get the whole problem wrong because you'll waste a lot of time there. Make sure you got it right. So first thing we check for, does this work? 7 times 7x, 49. 7 times, we can consider it negative 5. No, it's minus. We consider it negative 5. 7 times negative 5 is that minus 35 that we want. Cool. Are these, there's a key word there, special word, relatively prime. Are they relatively prime? Which means the only thing that goes into both those terms is one. And we're done. That's the idea of factoring. Do you guys feel okay with the factoring? I know it's been a while, but does that make sense to you? Okay, so that's our factoring. Let's go ahead and do a couple more examples. We're going to start ramping it up. This was probably the easiest one that we can do at this point. We're going to start talking about how variables play a part of this, and then put numbers, variables together, see what all we can do. So next example, how about y to the 5th minus y to the 7th? Y to the 5th minus y to the 7th. First thing, how many terms do we have? What do you think? Perfect. What's the first step in factoring every single time? What is it? So the GCF, and for now, we're going to write it down. When you get more practice with this, you're not going to do that. You're just going to go for it. You're just going to factor. So we're looking for the GCF. Are there any numbers which go into those two terms? So just one. Do we have to write down the one? Can, but it's not going to help us. So next we look for any variables. Are there any variables which go into both of those terms? Remember, it's very much like doing this and saying, hey, what's the GCF for those two terms? You're doing the same thing. It's just now we have a minus between it. But this idea does not change. What is the GCF according to the y to the fifth and y to the seventh? Remember that what it is, it's the biggest power that both of these things have. Not the biggest power you see, but the biggest power that both of these terms contain. What is it? That's right. Feel all right with the GCF? Yeah. Hey, we're factoring. What do we do with that y to the fifth? Where are we going to put that? So we have y to the fifth, and we have, wait a minute, factoring means that we're going the opposite distribution. So we're going to be creating some parentheses here. That always happens when you're factoring. Now we're just going to figure out what these two terms are going to be. You still have the same number of terms, don't you, inside those parentheses? There's two here. There's going to be two terms here. You're just creating a factor, something that you can multiply by that gives you back your original expression. That's the idea. Now, if you're a little bit kind of, oh my gosh, I don't know how to divide with these exponents, here's a not a trick, something that you can do to help you out. In order to find these, you guys all know that you divide, right? Well, take your first term, divide by your GCF, and whatever your answer is, by the way, this has to work, otherwise you picked the wrong GCF. It must always divide, otherwise it's not a factor. Did you catch that? If you're trying to divide, you go, wait, that doesn't work, pick the wrong thing. So go back and fix your GCF. This will always work. How much is y to the fifth divided by y to the fifth? You can always do it off the side if it gets a little bit more advanced for you. Man, I can't do it in my head right now. Not a big deal. Is that sign going to change? What do you think? Next one, this one. So we wrote the first term divided by GCF. That's y to the fifth. Divided by, just happened to be y to the fifth, it ends up being 1. That's our first term. Now we're going to take y to the seventh. We already know that we're going to have a minus there. Divided by y to the, wait, divided by what? Good. Sure. Second term, divided by GCF, you have two places. Can you do y to the seventh divided by y to the fifth? Yeah, y to the seventh. How do we do that? What do you do with those numbers there? And we know that when we're dividing common bases with exponents, we subtract those exponents. So we have y to the second, and that y to the second goes there. Can you still check your work even though you dealt only with variables here? Yeah. Distribution is the opposite of factoring. So those things work hand in hand, like division and multiplication. It is division and multiplication. So if we checked it, y to the fifth times 1, y to the fifth, and y to the fifth times y to the second. Remember, exponent rules. When I multiply common bases, I add those powers. So that would be y to the seventh, and we know we have it right. Now let's keep going just a little bit further. How about this? Is there anything goes into both 1 and y squared? Okay, let's check for that. Is there anything goes into both those things? 1 does. Anything bigger than 1? Are they relatively prime? Yeah. And we double check so we know we're good. Show of hands feel okay with what we're talking about. Okay. Now, in the future, we will be talking about how we can go further on something like this. If you know this concept, if you had this class before, or the factoring forms, I think most of you have. It's kind of like a refresher for you. That's called the difference of squares, and we're going to talk about. Did you know that term, that difference of squares term? Yeah. If you remember it, great. If not, we're going to cover it. That's called the difference of squares, and I'll show you what to do with that as we move forward. Okay, what I'd like you to do now, I'm just going to give you 2 examples. I want you to do them on your own to make sure that you get this concept. When I do this, it's going to be really, really similar to the last 2 that I gave you. It's just so you can have that practice, so that I don't want you completely following your notes. If you have to have your notes, okay, but try to do this fresh without having to go back And that way you actually get it embedded in your head. You guys with me on this stuff? You're quiet today. Are you okay? I'm excited, so it might be that I'm extremely tired and running just purely off adrenaline, but whatever. People on the video don't know this, but had a baby, in case, not me personally. But, anyway, go ahead with these two. So we're just working on factoring the GCF, so I want you to do that one. These two. So the idea is factoring is the opposite of distribution. Instead of multiplying, we are dividing. So the first thing we have to find is what will divide all of our terms. Remember, it's all of the terms here. In our case, we only have 2. The next examples are going to have 3, 4, and so forth and so on. So for us, in the first example, we're looking at 4t squared plus 12. We're going to find a number or a variable or both that will divide both of those terms. What number is that? 4. So if you want to write GCF, great. If not, that's okay. All you're going to do is write the GCF, whatever you have, in front of some parentheses. Factor means we're creating parentheses. And then start dividing. What's 4t squared, first term, divided by our GCF? So 4t squared divided by 4. You need to think of it like that. What is the answer? That's your first term inside of our parentheses. Is the plus going to change? Okay. 12 divided by 4. Have you double checked it to make sure that you're right? Don't go any further before you double check it. You gotta make sure, okay? I know it seems silly, but it's a pretty easy one. Yeah, okay, it's easy. But later on, when they become more difficult, double check it. Can we go any further here? Is there a number or variable that goes into both those terms? No. Relatively prime is a key word. We're good to go. We can double check the distribution in our head. Next up, tell me the GCF. I just want the right side people. These are 2 terms. Tell me the GCF with y to the 8th plus y to the 5th. What's the GCF there? Cool. That's the largest power of y that is common to both of them. Y to the 8th, it's too much for this guy. Did I give you the lunch analogy? Go to the, okay. Y to the 8th, you need to write it down, maybe write it real soft under there, divide by y to the 5th. What's y to the 8th divided by y to the 5th? Plus. Okay, cool. And now y to the 5th divided by y to the 5th, what is that? Show hands if you got those 2. That's great. That's fantastic. That's factoring the GCF. Are you ready to step it up just a little bit? By the way, in the previous examples, this one and this one, this is called a difference of cubes. I'm going to show you how to do that later. This right here is called, sorry, difference of squares. This right here is called a sum of cubes. And we're going to talk about how to factor this. You can actually keep going on this problem. Right now, as far as the GCF, you're done. But we can do other kind of brands of factoring as we go through these problems. So let's start getting towards that. Okay, all right. So negative 12x to the third, we get a plus 10x squared minus 2x. Left side people, real quick, how many terms do you have? So we're going to factor by the GCF, which is always our first step. We've got to have a GCF that goes into just 2 terms, right? All 3 terms? All 3 terms. So in our idea for finding a factor by the GCF, you got to come up with something, some factors, that goes into all the terms, not just 1 or 2, but all 3 of them, or all 4 if you have 4, everything. So let's look at the numbers first. Remember, we can do numbers and variables separately. Let's look at the numbers. I got negative 12, I got 10, and I got a negative 2 for my coefficients. Can you tell me a number that goes into all 3 of those? Remember that it doesn't have to be negative or positive for it to have a factor. So negative 12 doesn't really matter. What number are you going to pick? 2. Okay. Cool. 2 goes into 12, and 10, 2. Cool. That means that we can divide all 3 of these numbers by 2. Is that true? That means we can factor by it. Is that the biggest number that goes into all three of them?
Yes.
We want the biggest one. It's the greatest idea. Now we look for the variables. Remember, we do it separately. So I got x cubed, I got x squared, and I got x. Can you give me a variable that goes through all three of those factors, all three of those terms? Yeah, x. As we put that together, that right there is our GCF. Okay, middle people, tell me the next step. What am I going to do? Okay. So I got my 2x. I know factoring means parentheses. Quick question, how many terms are going to be inside the parentheses? Does this get rid of terms? So if you have two terms, you're going to have two terms and a factor. If you have three terms, you're going to have three terms and a factor. It's actually making it look a little bit bigger, isn't it? So inside there's going to be the same number of terms, but outside you're going to have this factor that you divided out. Now we start dividing. If you need to do this off to the side, do it. There's no sense in trying to do this in your head and getting it wrong. If you have trouble dividing this by this, and that's what factoring is, just write it out there. Negative 12x divided by 2x. That's fine. I don't mind seeing, well, I do mind that one. Why? If you do that, then sure, that's okay. How much is negative 12 divided by 2? What is it? Negative 6x squared. And yeah, x cubed divided by x. Remember, this is x to the first. So if you subtract them, 3 minus 1 x, that is your very first term. If you want to write this off to the side, do it. If it helps you, do it. If it doesn't, if you can do this straight in your head, that's fine too. I don't care. You didn't know how you guys learn. So if you struggle with this now, I'm always getting the wrong answer. Write it out. If not, if it makes perfect sense, I can do it in my head. Cool, do it in your head. Let's do the next one. I'm going to do this one just in our heads here. How much is 10x squared divided by, because remember we're factoring, divided by 2x. So 10 divided by 2 gives us 5. And x squared divided by x gives us x. Plus or minus? Plus. Lastly, plus or minus here? Minus. And then, oh yeah, that's a nice one. How much is 2x divided by 2x? 1. Notice how when you're factoring, you don't get rid of terms. They can change to ones, but that's the lowest that you can get right there. So when you have a GCF that matches up with one of your terms, you don't get 0. And you get 1, because something divided by itself is always. check it? Should you check it? Yes. Should you check to see that these are all relatively prime? Don't go any further before that. Now, I'd like to do something else. A lot of times in math, it's really, really helpful to factor so that two things happen. One, that your polynomial, this is just a math expression inside here with more than one term, that your polynomial is in order. In order means that it goes from largest to smallest exponent ending with a constant. So for instance, this out of order. See what I'm talking about? This is out of order. This is in order. This is in order, in order, in order. Do you guys get it? This is in order. We factor so that that happens. We like to put things in order even before we factor. So here we probably would have done this a little different. Second thing, we also like to factor so that the first term of the polynomial that is in order, I'll say that again because some of you guys are zoning out already. Don't zone out. Zone out. You'll want to factor so that firstly, it's in order. Yep. Secondly, that the first term is positive. That helps a lot because the next techniques we're going to do are dealing with these guys, how you factor this. And it's really, really hard if that is negative. Does that make sense to you? So when you do this process, when you factor out your GCF, you could have one of two answers. One could be just like this, 2x, and this is perfectly fine as far as factoring the GCF. But there is an alternative. And this is the one that I'm going to prefer because it makes the rest of our lives easier. Instead of going just with 2x, check this out. Follow the logic here. Is this in order from largest to smallest as far as the exponents go?
Yes.
That's great. That's what we want. 3, 2, 1. You with me? Okay. When I factored 2x. Did I get a positive here? This is what I want to be positive. How can I change this to be positive? What would I have to do to my GCF? Okay, so instead of having the GCF of 2x, let's say I did a GCF of negative 2x. Is it possible? Yeah. Will negative 2x still divide that? Yeah. And that? Yeah. And that? Yeah. What's going to happen to all three of my signs? They're going to change. That's the idea. So you have choice here, okay? Both of these are going to be absolutely correct. But as far as continuing the process of factoring, it makes it a lot easier if you factor so that your first term becomes positive. The one thing you got to worry about is that you don't mess up the rest of your signs. So I'm going to lead you through it one time real quick, and then we're going to continue with another problem. If we factor out the negative 2x, tell me something. What's negative 12x to the third divided by negative 2x? Remember, a negative divided by a negative is a bam. So we go to x squared. Positive 10x. Positive divided by a negative is a negative divided by a negative is a. Are these the same? Yeah. These are, well, do they look the same? Do they represent the same thing? Yes. Yeah. Which one's going to be nicer for us? It kind of depends on the context of your problem. This technically is factored out GCF. So is that one. This one would be easier to work on after this, though. So you guys can understand the difference there. Okay, cool. Tell you what, I want you to try a couple of them on your own. In fact, what I want out of you, I'm going to give you two of them that I know that you can do really well. And I'm going to give you one that's going to challenge you just maybe a little bit. See if you remember how to do this. Are you guys ready for that? Question?
You know how you said, like, maybe check to make sure everything's relatively done.
Yeah.
What happens if it's not?
If you have some terms, like 2 or 3 terms that are not relatively prime, you did this wrong. Factor in GCF will create, if you do the GCF, not just a CF, CF is common factor, right? If you do the greatest common factor, your terms will be relative. Let's do the next one. I'm going to do the
Four. abdicate, disabuse, apostate, derivative, dichotomy, ascend, bask, tortuous, accord, 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 tortuous, accord, academic, 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 accomplice, subside, subside, exceed, exceed,